Hi, my name is Angie Christensen from Simply Divine Living, and my goal for today is to take out all the fear of fermenting. I'm going to show you how this can be done fast, easy, and safely. So first, I want to show you how easy it can be to ferment your own probiotic vegetables. This is going to save you hundreds over having to buy these at the grocery store, and it is so easy, you really are going to be shocked. So I'm going to show you 3 things that you can do that are some of the most popular and the easiest fermented food. If you are just getting started, or if you want to be able to feed this to your family and not have them even know that you're feeding them fermented food, these are some of the best ones to start with. So pickles are, of course, the most famous fermented food. And the reason for that is that cucumbers automatically have all of the good bacteria on their skin that leads to a really easy and effective ferment. And people figured that out thousands of years ago. So there are pickles in every culture all over the world. And if you have canned pickles, you know it's a fairly long process. You're putting all of the cucumbers in the jar, and then you've got to heat process. But let me show you what it looks like to do pickles in the old-fashioned way of fermenting them. So you can see in this jar, all I've done is I've added my spices at the bottom, and spices make no difference in fermenting. So you can change up the spices however you want to make the flavor that you want. And then I've got my cucumbers in the jar. So this process probably took me 10 minutes, right? To put the spices in, to put all of my cucumbers in the jar. And then the only other thing that we have to do is add the salt water. So I have in my cup here, I've got 4 cups of water, and we're going to fill this jar with water. Like that. And then I am going to add my salt. So we're going to add to this one, we're going to add okay, and I'll show you in a minute how to do the math to figure out how much salt you need. And I'm going to close the lid, and that is it. It is a 15-minute thing from beginning to end to do fermented pickles. And now nature is going to do all the rest of the work for me. I'm going to be able to just set these aside in my kitchen and let them go through the natural fermentation process. There is no heat processing. With these jars, there is literally nothing else I have to do. And in the end, you end up with a beautiful jar of pickles. These pickles have been in my basement for 2 years, and they are still good and fine. I haven't had to store them in the refrigerator or do anything else. And we went from regular cucumbers to this in less than 15 minutes. So it is so, so simple. Let me show you another one. Another fun one is to do either dill green beans or dill carrot sticks. This one is great, especially for kids. If you ferment, this is a fun one because we did the rainbow carrots, which kids think are fun, but you just can slice up your carrot sticks, put them in a jar, and same thing, we pour the salt water on, we close the lid, and it's done. You wait 2 to 3 days, and you have probiotic carrots for your kids. They're still crunchy, they've got all the flavor of the garlic and the dill in them. Kids love them, and you're getting your probiotics. You can do the same thing with green beans. All I did was fill this jar with green beans, and it's got the garlic and the dill in here. And we go through the same process. All we have to do is add the water. And I am measuring the water as I go so that I know how much salt to add in the end. So we fill our jar just right up to the neck here, because we do want to leave a little bit of head space because things are going to expand as they ferment. And that was 6 cups of water. So I'm going to add my salt. I am going to close the lid. And that is done. Isn't that amazing? It is so much easier than canning. All you have to do, put it in the jar, add your salt, close the lid, and walk away. And these are so delicious. They stay crunchy, but they've got that extra flavor, that little bit of kick from the fermenting, the flavor from the garlic and the dill, and they are so great to eat. Now, I want to show you one more that is really, really fun, but that uses a totally different process. So sometimes we want to ferment something where we don't want to add water, right? If you are fermenting your sauerkraut or your kimchi, or in this case, we're going to do salsa, those are vegetables that have so much water in them already that we don't want to water them down by adding a salt solution. So what we're going to do is we are going to add the salt by weight, and then it will use all the natural liquid that is already in the food. So fermented salsa is really fun. Again, like the carrots, it takes 2 days roughly to ferment your salsa, and then you're eating your chips and your guac and your salsa, and you're getting all of these amazing probiotics with it. Kids, your family will love it. It's so fast. And if you're someone who loves salsa and likes to can your salsa, this is so much faster. But with this one, we do have to do a little bit of math. So let me show you. So in here, I've got my chopped salsa, okay? And this wasn't even a recipe. This was the wing it kind of recipe of what I had. If you have a favorite salsa recipe, you can use it. But it is just chopped tomatoes, chopped peppers, some cilantro, onions, and I have just diced all of those up and put them here in a container. Now, the thing about tomatoes that we all know is that there's a ton of water in tomatoes, right? So we're going to strain off some of that water. So I am just going to put this really quick in a strainer, and you can skip this step if you want, but your salsa will be a little more watery. And so this is a tip of how to have kind of a denser salsa. Now I know some people like to have their salsa all uniform consistency, and so you can blend this all up if you like, and the process will work exactly the same. But I am just going to fill my colander here with all my chopped salsa. And then we're just going to let the extra water come off here. And you can see how all of that is just dripping off. So I'm going to give that just a minute to drain, and then we'll show you how to do the math to add the salt and how fast you can do this in a way that you can either eat it in just a couple days, or you can store it and have fresh salsa year-round. Okay, so now that we've strained out the extra water and we just have our chopped salsa, now we're going to do the math. So for this, I just need a kitchen scale. And you can use any kitchen scale you want, but for fermenting, I do love this scale. It's just an OXO kitchen scale. You can get it on Amazon, but the thing that makes it so nice is that this pulls out. And the reason that's so helpful is that when you're fermenting, you're often using these really big bowls. So this pulls right out, and that way I can still see the weight even though I've got this giant bowl on my scale. So I'm just going to zero my bowl here, turn it on, zero my bowl out. So we have a 0 starting weight, and then we are going to weigh the salsa. So we pour that right in there, and I have 8 pounds and 2 ounces of salsa. So the way that I'm going to do the math here, I'll teach you how to do the math for salsa, is I've got to convert all of this into ounces, right? So I take 8 times 16, because there's 16 ounces in a pound. So that's 128 ounces plus the additional 2 ounces I had. So I have 130 ounces of salsa in my bowl. And then I'm going to multiply that by 0.025. And that is going to tell me how many ounces of salt that I need to add to this salsa to get it to do a proper ferment. So now I'm just going to take my same scale, zero it out again, and And we'll show you how much salt that is. So I need 3¼ ounces of salt. Almost there. Right there, 3¼ So you can see that's quite a bit of salt. But the salt is what's doing all the work for us here, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But I'm just going to sprinkle that salt in. And then here, you can do this however you want. You can use a spoon, you can just get your hands in here. But all we're going to do is mix that salt into our salsa. And then I'm going to take a scoop, and we're going to fill our jar. Okay, and I'm going to kind of push it down in here. We want to really get it full. And you notice, if you look closely, that as I push it down, the water level is actually rising, so that you can see when we fill this really well, it's going to be covered in water, just like our carrots were or our pickles were, but all the water is coming from the vegetables themselves instead of from an external source. So can you see the bubbles there? See that we've got the water all the way up to the neck. Okay. And then I'm just going to make sure the rest of that's clean. Close the jar. And that is done. That is it. That is all the work you have to do, and nature is going to do all the rest of the work for you. So can you see how simple this is? This does not take a lot of time. It does not take any kind of expertise. It does not take anything that's highly technical or involved. It is a super fast process. It boils down to put your vegetables in the jar, add your salt, either in the form of a salt water solution or adding the salt to the vegetables themselves, close the lid, and you are done. So I hope you see how simple that is. So just now, to help you understand how this is working, and especially to understand how to keep this safe. So for fermenting to be safe and effective, all you have to do is control 3 things: salt, oxygen, and temperature. So let me show you how in this very short 15-minute process, we're controlling those 3 things, okay? So salt is what controls the entire fermentation process. To have this turn out well, we are just trying to get the salt percentage high enough that it suppresses any bad bacteria, but low enough that it doesn't suppress the good bacteria. There's like this magic middle that just encourages this proliferation of all of those probiotic bacteria to grow. And that percentage is 2.5 for most vegetables, 3.5 when you're doing pickles and peppers. And if you don't want to weigh it all out and you want just a rough way to do that, 2.5 is roughly 1 teaspoon of salt per cup of water, and 3.5 is roughly 1.5 teaspoons of salt per cup of water. So that's why when I was filling my jars, I measured my water, and then I just computed how much salt I needed to add to get that kind of solution. If it's easier for you, and especially if you're doing a whole bunch of fermenting at the same time, you can just make up your salt solution where you've already added your salt to your water, and then you can just pour it in. But either way works as long as you get the salt percentage right. But for the food where you don't add the water, so like our salsa, sauerkraut, kimchi, then you are adding your salt by weight. But either way, that is what helps you to get a proper fermentation. Okay, the second thing you need to do is make sure that you keep out oxygen. And honestly, this is the step where things tend to go wrong for most people. When I meet people and they're like, oh, I fermented, but I got mold. And that's the most common thing that happens is people get mold in their ferment. And it's really frustrating to get all this beautiful produce and to put it into a ferment and then have to toss it at the end because you get mold. And the way to prevent that is to make sure there is no oxygen in your ferment. So the kind of bacteria that we grow in a vegetable ferment is anaerobic, meaning it's bacteria that needs an absence of oxygen to grow. Things like mold need the presence of oxygen to grow. So we're trying to make sure that we get an absence of oxygen. And this is where the jar makes all the difference. When I first started fermenting, I started in canning jars because I had them, right? It was free and whatever. But with canning jars, you have to put a weight on and you're trying to keep everything submerged under the water to keep it oxygen free, because there's no way in a canning jar, unless you heat process it, which you don't want to do with fermenting or you kill all your probiotics, there's just no way to keep it airtight. And so my first year I did all of these pickles and I had all of this beautiful fermenting, and I had to throw away 80% of it because it got mold in it. And I was like, okay, that cost me way more money than it would have to just had a better jar. So the next thing I did the next year is I got those jar top lids that go on the top of a canning jar to try to create an airtight seal. And those worked better, but they're awkward, and if they get drained of water, then you get air in your ferment, or if they get knocked off and they take up more space, it just was really awkward and harder to use. So the third year I did fermenting, I found these jars, and they're called Fido jars. They're made in Italy, so they're really good quality glass, which is important if you are fermenting, and because it creates a lot of pressure and you don't want this to burst. And so these jars are magic for keeping oxygen out, and I'll show you how they work. They have this seal right here. And what happens is as your food starts to ferment, it produces a lot of gas. And that gas is going to start to bubble. By day 2, you'll start to see stuff bubbling up in your ferment. And as it does that, it's actually going to put so much pressure in this jar that it's going to push stuff out of this seal. So you're actually going to possibly see even some liquid leak out, and if not, you're definitely going to see some gas coming out. And that's a good thing, because as that happens, it forces all the oxygen out of the jar. But then after a couple of days, the fermentation process slows. And as that happens, then the pressure inside the jar is no longer greater than the pressure outside of the jar, and this seals. And when that happens, then there is no oxygen that can get back in. And that's why these are a close it and forget it type jar. We put our food in, we close the lid. You don't have to use weights. You don't have to burp the jar. You don't have to do anything. You just shut it and forget it, and it will do the entire fermentation process for you. And I have never gotten mold since I switched to this type of jar. So these are my idiot-proof jars that for me made this so simple. So they will keep the oxygen out for you, and you don't have to worry at all. And the last thing you want to control when you're fermenting is temperature. The ideal temperature for fermentation is like 50 to 60 degrees, and that doesn't have to be exact, but you just want to put this in the coolest place in your house. So if you've got a basement, stick it in a basement. If you don't have a basement, find the coolest corner of your house and just put these in there. And this will continue to ferment slowly over time. So another thing is you can control how strong of a fermented taste this has by how long you leave it. If you want it to have a really mild taste, with something like salsa, you ferment it for 2 days, you eat it, and you won't even really be able to tell that it's fermented. Or you can keep your fermented foods for longer, and the taste will continue to get a little more of that fermented vinegary flavor, which some people love. But it also allows you to store your food. So the only food that's fermented that has to be kept in a fridge is fruit. And it's not that you have to keep it in the fridge to keep it from going bad. It's that you have to keep it in the fridge if you don't want it to go alcoholic. Because fruit, when it ferments, produces alcohol. And then you get what one of my students coined is party salsa, right? Because tomato is technically a fruit. So this salsa, after it has fermented, which like I say only takes about 2 days, then you move this to the fridge. And that will slow the fermentation process down so you don't get alcohol. With salsa, the thing that I look for is when it starts to have fermented enough to preserve itself, you'll see the water separate on the bottom here. And you'll have just a little bit of a water ring at the bottom. And as soon as you see that, you know you can move this to the fridge. But all of your things that are vegetable-based never have to be stored in a fridge. So you do not have to have a ton of fridge space to ferment. You can take these jars and just stick them in a cool place in your house, and they will be good. So I hope you see how this is so simple. If fermenting has been overwhelming to you, if it has been scary to you, I hope now you are ready to give this a try, and you will see how profoundly this really can change your health. And then make sure to watch the next video where I'm going to explain why this is so good for you and how you can use these different fermented foods to keep flu season away, to heal gut issues, and even to improve depression and anxiety, because fermented food is so powerful for your health.